Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 22. Rather fitting that this is 22. I've been planning on this one for a while. So in order to understand today's topic, which is tarot, we've been talking a little bit about occultism. For those of you listening to this session does stand independent. You don't need to hear the others. The others do help. But if you want to understand this topic more, you'll find more about occultism in this course. So today, in focusing on tarot, we are explaining the history of the cards themselves. We're explaining what tarot is and how it's been misunderstood. And then we are going over the kind of fundamentals of how to understand tarot. So in this hour or so session, you're going to get a rounded perspective and understanding of a little bit of everything about tarot. So first, what is tarot, right? Basically is the most popular form of divination in the modern world. In the ancient world, which, by the way, if you want to learn more about this, go to the divination topic in the spiritual studies course. Anyway, in the ancient world, we had tea leaves. You could use the entrails of fish. You could use different plants. You could roll dice. There were all sorts of ways to divine the future. Astrology is another one. People think of crystal balls when they think of this stuff, psychic stuff. And really, when it comes down to tarot, you could say that those that read them are psychic, if you want to get into that. However, someone who is familiar with understanding the language of symbols is capable of doing it one and the same. There definitely is an artistry when it comes to tarot and understanding it. But what I want to clear up right away is that many people believe that they don't want to be read because they're afraid of getting a bad card. There are no bad cards, really. We'll go over that towards the end of the talk, the specificities. They don't want to get a death card. They don't want to get a devil card. They don't want to get a hanged man. None of these are bad in the way that people think of it. It is over sensationalized. Also, this talk of tarot being aligned with conjuring spirits and devilry. This is silly. This is nothing other than a tremendously silly approach. If somebody actually looked into tarot, they would realize how terribly wrong they are, and that most of this can be chalked up to fear-mongering Catholicism. Why is tarot so popular is an interesting question. And I'm not saying it's tremendously popular. I'm just saying popular compared to other forms of divination. And the reason is that it is a lot more directed. There is a lot more, it's a lot more matter of fact. It's a lot more spelled out than other forms of divination. It gives you more detail to go on. Thus why it's really caught on. But anyway, that's a brief introduction as to the ideas, but I want to spend a good amount of time here talking about, well, where did this all come from? How did this start? And I'm going to start and set the tone very fast and say that people don't even know where the term tarot came from. There are many different explanations. So some people have said that it's Taoist and Chinese. Some people have said that it's Latin, combination of the word rota and orat, which means the speaking wheel. Others say it's Indo-Tartar, which is kind of like a reference to the zodiac. Others say that it's Hebrew, meaning like the word Torah, tarot, Torah. this word Torah, meaning law, interesting. Or, you know, some could say that it comes from Egyptian, from tar, which means path, and ro, which means regio or region. So the path or the region, which path would be a good way of understanding what tarot is, illuminating the path in front of you. We see in the etymology of the word tarot that in Old Italian it was referred to as tarocchi, and we can try to trace that to Arabic as well in the word taraha, which means rejected or put aside, something that's put aside. Interesting note there. And this is all just to say that there's many ways that we can trace the word alone. So in regards to where it comes from, you see, and here's something to distinguish straight away. It is a card game. Tarocchi is a card game. In German, it's Tarak. Taros is literally a card game, like Uno. And that this is more or less how it started. It started as cards, just a card game, you know, play spades, play Texas Hold'em, whatever, you know, a fun pastime. However, this idea of cartomancy or divinations through cards is linked to a number of different traditions, much like the name tarot. So you could say that it's coming from the I Ching. It's inspired by Asia. You could say that it's inspired by the Indian Tantra tradition, the Tantric tradition. You could say that it's inspired by the hieroglyphs of Egypt. And you could say that it's inspired by the Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism. It's not wrong to consider that these symbols of tarot are coming from the Book of Thoth, as mentioned in Hermeticism. It's also not wrong to say that they're coming from the 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, which, by the way, the I Ching is more than 3,000 years old. So that's a real long story there. And it's not wrong potentially to say that it came from the gypsies. Now, to talk about that a little bit, I think everybody should really know this. Gypsies come from originally left India, and there's a number of stories as to why. I'm not going to get into that, but it was a migratory time, and some of them went to the Middle East, and some of them went to Egypt. And these particular people that went to Egypt, as they went to Europe, were called gypsies, like Egyptians. Okay, gypsies, just drop the E, right? So they're calling them Egyptian, which you can see how kind of like bullish that understanding is. And the idea is that these gypsies came into knowledge of esotericism in Egypt and brought that over to Europe, which would subsequently inspire the deck that we call tarot. The symbolism of the cards would therefore be derived from Egypt and fortune telling. Now, the other way that we could look at this is say that it's all about the Knights of Templar. We could say that that the Knights of Templar, in which, by the way, were dismantled in 1309, had accumulated a tremendous amount of wealth and knowledge of secret society material. They participated in gematria, which was the decoding of letters and numbers in the Bible. So they were definitely into esotericism and Kabbalah accordingly. And to pick up some of this occultism or some of this, woo-woo that goes along with the story of tarot could be linked to the Templars accordingly. I mean, you go to their Gothic cathedrals and you see all this symbolism. You read how into alchemy they were. You learn about how they had these very set rules that you could not let anybody see you make gold, you know, to hold the secrets. So all these things would kind of give a squinty eye towards the Templars being something a part of the story. However, scholars are very adamant to say that this started as a card game, nothing more, no more inspiration needed. The occultism came later. That much might be true, but the occultism that came later also had roots. So this is a very complicated story. Not just the word itself, but also where's this inspiration coming from? Where did these ideas originate in? It tends to, in explaining any one of these things, it tends to fan itself out tremendously. So you could say, if we're dealing with the regular story, hey Connor, get to the real nitty gritty solid story of this, right? You could say that it all started in the 1200s with the gypsies or the Templars giving ideas. And then you could say that in the 13th century or 14th century, that the actual cards started to be made after this knowledge had been around for a while. So the people that brought them are also thought to be the Chinese, in the sense of inspiring the card game based off of something that's existed in China for a long time, which is the game Mahjong, Mahjong. It's also thought that the Islamic Mamluk cards are an inspiration. So now we're bringing, you know, Islam into this too. So it could be Asia, it could be Europe, but during this time, 12th century to 14th century, we see that the ideas are there and the cards are being made for the first time. So the first recorded date of actual cards seems to be 1367. These cards, by the way, have never been banned by the church. Back in the day, the Renaissance, or not the Renaissance, the Inquisition and the church never disallowed for these cards. So the idea of them being very risque or devil worship, again, is not substantiated. So the first time that we see a recognizable deck, as we might call it, in tarot, not these kind of more anarchic early beginnings, these kind of prototype cards. The first time we really start seeing it is 1440 and 1450 in Milan, Florence, Bologna, all in Italy. This is when we start to see the regular four-suit pack, which everybody knows these cards, you know, all the numbers, spades, clubs, so on. But what makes them tarot in particular is the inclusion of what are called trump cards nowadays, but back then were called the Triomphi cards, which is the whole deck would have been called the Carte dei Trionfi, which would have been triumph cards, which we now call trump cards or trumps. So these are found, as I mentioned, in 1440. So these are the trump cards are really where you get the hard and fast esotericism of tarot, the story of tarot, which I'll explain more later. But the earliest decks are all hand painted. Mind you, you know, here's this whole discussion of the printing press, right? So since they were hand painted, it's generally thought that they were rather small, and it is generally 100% true, actually, that it was purely a thing for aristocrats. You needed the money to commission these cards until later, and the printing press came out, and then mass production was possible. But that didn't mean that they got super popular. What really made them popular was the Italian Wars. And this spread it outside of Italy to Switzerland, to France. It would get very popular in France. And back in this time, we're talking about the Tarot of Marseille. And this was the kind of OG deck, the original cards is the Tarot of Marseille. However, later on in the 18th century, this is where we see this big revival of the cards, bigger than ever, all around Europe, with few exceptions. One of the exceptions is Britain and Ireland. French tarot really took it off much later too, in the 1970s. That really took off in the 1970s in general, but especially the actual card game again. So I'm telling you kind of two different histories here. I'm telling you about the formation of the cards, but I'm also telling you about its formation of occultism. So these stories are intermixed, right? There's the card game and there's the divination game. And these are two different things. So in France, in Europe, all across what used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you'll see people play the actual tarot game. So keep that in mind. You know, that's a portion of confusion to be had all over, right? So the pictures became stylized over time, and this would attract the mystics, the spiritualists that later would become convinced that they were capable of divination, that you could use the cards for divination. This is the general understanding of as the cards have gone. Like I said, first it was just a game, later comes the divination, but before the game and the later divination, the knowledge was there that would later become a part of the cards. That's the general understanding. You can mix things up a lot. Like I said, this is all pretty wish-washy, but what is for sure is that the one that really would bring occultism to tarot was Jean-Baptiste Elinet. And we're talking the 1700s here. So he is the one that's responsible for making this much more popular and making this much more occult. So he's the one that issued the first divinatory deck, exclusively for divination, rather than something for entertainment or to show off in aristocratic parties. But alongside Jean-Baptiste, we have Antoine Court de Gebelin, which is another notable name in the history of tarot. Again, well, in this case, it's a lot more explicit because Gebelin is a Freemason, and he decidedly traces these cards back to the Egyptians, tying them to the occult, saying that the cards imbibe or embody the ideas such as Osiris, Ra, Isis, and the like, that the artwork is synonymous to the Egyptian hieroglyphics, like we said before. So now we got it in the hand of an occultist and a Freemason, which Freemasons are essentially occultists as well. And they are writing books and popularizing this. When it comes to Gebelin, I hope I'm saying his name right, Gebelin, he's the one that first set out the idea in 1781 that the cards are tied to Hebrew letters. If you get a deck now, the Thoth deck or the Rider-Waite, you'll see that the trump cards have not only an astrological alchemical sign at the bottom, but also have a Hebrew letter assigned with it as well. And we can thank that Hebrew letter to Gebelin. He's the one that made that connection, the Freemason. And he's the one that included marrying those two traditions together, or remarrying those two traditions together, depending on how we want to look at this. Later on, we would see this guy, Eliphas Levi, in 1856, tying the Kabbalah to tarot, which that would be, you know, kind of implied if the Hebrew letters are already there. But again, as I've mentioned before, Kabbalah's secrets or Kabbalah's wisdom has only recently really been made available to even the occultists. It was kept under very tight lips for a long time. So that's why this is showing up later. And then, you know, you have the Golden Dawn, as I mentioned last week in the Hermeticism talk. Their leader, Samuel Mathers, or Samuel Liddell McGregory Mathers, head occultist, former Freemason, making tarot a default part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So here, as I've mentioned before, we see the confluence of Hermeticism, tarot, ancient pagan practices all coming together and being brought up, emblemized by the Golden Dawn, making it subsequently a lot more available to the public. But right after this time too, in our whole story here, this is when we're seeing in 1910 the Rider-Waite deck first being created. This is by a mystic, a academic, a visionary named Arthur Edward Waite. Waite is the one that came up with the, well, I don't want to say came up with, cooked up, researched, looked into, collected the knowledge that would create the original OG tarot. For those that don't know, the Rider-Waite deck is considered the kind of quintessential tarot deck, because there are many to choose from nowadays. He commissioned Pamela Coleman Smith to do the illustrations. So luckily enough, we have the name of both the illustrator and the guy who came up with it, right? So Waite was he was well acquainted with occultism. He wrote many books on Kabbalah, on black magic, grimoires, ceremonial magic. He was very into this topic, and he became infatuated with tarot, and thus why he created the deck, and thus why it has such a bravado about it, because he knew what he was doing. And he's quoted with saying, "The true tarot is symbolism. It speaks no other language and offers no other signs." So for Waite, tarot really is about knowing how to read the symbols. Anything else is confusion. And him putting this out there is yet again popularizing it, making it more accessible. This would capture the attention of the derelict mystics and the adepts of different secret societies. And then our last kind of step on the history of the cards of tarot and the occultism is Alistair Crowley. He created the Thoth, the Book of Thoth, the Thoth deck, in 1944. That was the last major influence of tarot. And, I think just about everybody's somewhat familiar with Crowley, right? Falling out of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, creating Thelema, always being a big show about him, ceremonial sex magic, so forth. And regardless of what you think of his, endeavors, the Thoth deck is also not equally respected, but nearly equally respected to the Rider-Waite. It is also a very tried and true deck with honestly few differences than the Rider-Waite deck. There's some name changes and differences in art, but a lot of it's fundamentally the same. Nowadays, we see ever since the 70s, especially, a tremendous more amount of decks. Some I will prize higher than others because, like Rider-Waite said, it's all about the symbolism. So a lot of the modern decks go for kind of gimmicky themes, which I'm not going to say are all bad. Don't get me wrong, but to lose the symbolism of the cards is to lose an entire other layer, an entire level of depth that the cards are supposed to have. So as I mentioned before, you would think during this whole history that I've spoke of here that the church would have something to say about it. And in all the Inquisition documents, the tarot deck is never mentioned. At times, the church did outlaw gambling, but like I said, the deck, the cards were of a board game. It was for fun. And also, I should note that it's advantageous that they never got rid of them because, as I mentioned, the cards are associated with the aristocratic class, the richies. So, you know, whether laws pass, the laws have always been for the poor. The laws don't apply to the rich. So they would never do things to oust the rich, right? Because who's paying the communion baskets? Anyway, so this is the point where I want to start getting into actually understanding tarot itself. You know, the first 30 minutes get into the historical context, last 30 minutes get into what the actual meat and potatoes is. So if you're a practitioner or if you're somebody who's getting into this or you're just curious, this is going to give you either to the advanced or the beginner different ways of approaching the cards, understanding the cards, the different suits, and all the different categories that they fall into. So we'll begin with the different suits. And mind you, all of tarot is synonymous with the regular card deck, you know, aces, jokers, kings, queens, spades, hearts, right? All of this is synonymous. So anyway, let's get into it. Okay. So, cups. Cups are corresponding to hearts. So in tarot, it's cups, and in the regular deck, it's hearts. If you pull a cups card, cups cards are always associated with emotions. They represent water. They represent the direction of west, and they represent the season of fall. In a reading, pulling a cups card, again, has to do with emotion. So what does this mean? It could be in regards to happiness. It could be in regards to love. It could be in regards to decision-making. There's an association with emotions in general. It has everything to do with the emotional part of the consciousness. The emotional part of decision-making. So somebody who's pulling a lot of cups cards, this could have to do with a personal matter, a romantic affair, a marriage, or just plainly one's emotional intelligence, their emotional landscape. So that's what hearts is about. That's what cups is about. The cup runneth over, right? There's always been this association with cups and emotions in this way. Feminine, the cup, right? The swords are correspondent with spades. Makes sense, right? This is the element of air, the north direction, and winter. So what does winter feel like, right? Winter is cold, merciless. There's a oppression, but it also involves ambition, courage. But all these things also include strife. So pulling a swords card is involving the intellectual, involving power, involving thinking. It represents the mental end of life. However, Pulling a lot of swords cards might point to habits, the need to change habits, the need to reflect on habits. A sword, literally in esoteric symbolism, divides things. It cuts one thing away from something it is not. So it's a divider. So someone who has a lot of swords cards needs to clean house. They need to get rid of something. They need to kill something. It's not a happy thing. And by kill, this is all allegorical, mind you. This is not something that people are happy to see, because generally swords cards are pointing at their own bad habits, and the need of painful change, right? If you need a surgery, you need to cut yourself up in order to get better, in order to heal, right? So swords cards, the winter is a time for enduring. Um, and air is a very flighty element to work with. It can whip you, but it can also be soft, right? It's very unpredictable. Anyway, the next one is wands, and wands are equivalent to clubs. And this is the element of fire, the direction of south, and the season of summer, which makes sense, right? Fire, summer, south is hotter. Hey, fire and wands represent change. What does fire do? Fire changes, it flickers, it is activity, it's movement, growth, creation, creativity, presumably, intelligence as well, but inspiration, determination. All these things involve some sort of energy. So a lot of, uh, um, if you are to pull a lot of wands cards, the theme always is that something is being created. There's a passion, there's an initiative, there's a trailblazing. The situation is very heated, right? There's a lot going on. It's not placid, it's not calm, it's energetic. So interesting note here, right? Because how you would describe fire is the alchemical symbol of wands. Interesting, right? And lastly, when it comes to the suits, we're talking about what in some decks is called coins, what in some decks are called pentacles, and what in other decks are called discs. So it depends on what deck you're picking up, but it's either coins, pentacles, or discs. They're all the same thing, just different names, okay? This corresponds to the suit of diamonds in the regular deck. As we can presume, the direction is east. It represents east. And the season is spring, right? The last one left. The element, again, the last one left, is earth. Pentacles, discs, coins are an earth card. So it is in respect to material possessions, money, finances, trades, all means of commerce, materialism, security, solidity. Earthy people need to feel like they're right. They need to feel like they have firm footing. They need to feel like they're very convinced of the material world. They're not interested in abstract things. They are caught up in what is immediately present and what you can put your hands on. So in this way, to draw a bunch of coin cards, pentacle cards, disc cards, means that this reading has a lot to do with this willingness or this creation of stability. This person, it's in regards to work or a career or getting a house or providing for a family or any of these things that are very earthly. I feel compelled to say superficial, not in a derogatory sense, but your immediate concerns and immediate needs. These are the coins. These are, the diamonds, pentacles, discs, right? Earthy. So that's the different suits. And in the same way, we also have this translation between the court cards. And by court cards, I mean, in the regular deck, we're used to seeing the Jack, Queen, King. And in the tarot deck, it's very similar, except we have one other. So it goes the queen, the king, the knight, and the page or the princess. Again, depending on what deck you're looking at. So the knight, and other decks too, you get the prince as well. So at max, in the tarot deck, you have the princess, the prince, the knight, the queen, and the king. So there's the potential of all the court cards. So the page cards or the princess cards, all of these, by the way, represent a physical person. This person doesn't necessarily have to be alive. It could be somebody who's passed on that's influencing how we understand the reading. Again, not in a spirit way, but just to understand this person's mentality. The princess cards mean that whoever we're reading about would tend to be younger than the person who's getting the reading. So, you know, if they're a queen, they tend to be older. If they're a princess, they tend to be younger, right? Presumably. Usually the prince, the princess, or the page, or the knight as well, all tend to be somewhat naive or immature in some way. They're learning their faculties. They're learning how to use the gifts that they've been given. So it's not all bad, but it's to say that you should have the reading represent both the negative and the positive. When it comes to knights, though, knights always imply this aspect of action or vigor, or they're doing something. These are the people in the world that are making things happen. They are the movers and shakers of the world. They're doing things. They're affecting the environment. Princes are more placid. They sit. They're existing. It's not to say they do nothing, but it's to say that knights are especially involved. And the negative side of this is that they can be extreme and they can be impulsive. And you can see how I'm listing all these court cards, and you can kind of imagine different people in your life that go along with these cards. That's the whole idea of a reading. It's all about association. And presumably, just to kind of quick get this through, the Queen card is always going to be the maternal figure, the mother. And mind you, too, any of these court cards could be the actual person who's been giving the reading, or getting the reading to themselves, if that makes sense. The person that the reading's about. They could be represented by the Knight of Discs or the Princess of Wands. You know, this could represent them, and their best friend could be the Queen of Cups, right? Anyhow, the Queen is going to be the mother figure, the emotional support, the one who has wisdom, solidity. So it's always going to be this kind of maternal essence. And subsequently, the King. The King is going to be the masculine side of that. So power, authority, the one who dominates, delegates, controls. Representative of the father figure. So in this way, mother, father, queen, king, and whatever archetype that they're going along with. Okay, so that is your kind of like introduction or spread, or help you to understand different ways of interpreting all the different suit cards, the different ways that the regular deck translates to the tarot deck. But at this point, I need to talk about the triumph cards or the trump cards. And this is where we go away from the regular deck and into what is legitimately tarot and what is legitimately the esotericism, the occultism of tarot. Okay, excuse me. So, yeah, gosh, there's a lot to get into, huh? The one I want to start with, and I'm not going to do all the tarot cards because I could literally do a whole session and then some, talking about the story that the major arcana, the trump cards, tell. There's a reason it goes from 0 to 21. there's a story in how the numbers go up. This has a lot to do with Kabbalah, but most notably, it's the story of the esoteric mysteries. So to follow in tarot and to study the occultism of the trump cards is the treasure trail of understanding the wisdom of secret societies. It's about stitching it all together. So in this way, I'm going to talk about the particular trump cards that are the hardest to understand. So I'm not doing them all. I'm talking about the ones that aren't so accessible to the layman. So first and foremost is the Fool card. The Fool card is not a fool in the way that we think about it. This is the one that is synonymous to the court deck, and that's the Joker. It's the reason the regular card deck has the Joker. It's because everything is originated at the Fool. That's why it's 0, not 1. And it being a 0 is immediately hinting you towards the paradox of what the Fool is. So in the story of tarot, it all begins with the Fool. It's called the Fool's Journey. What does this mean? So in this way, the Fool is like the Godhead. The Godhead is completely realized, infinite, and is the all, but decides to make himself a fool, to shatter himself into a million pieces, to experience himself as a finite thing in the infinite world. This is the Fool. It only begins if the Godhead decides to fool himself, herself, all self, right? That's one way. Another way is that all truth, all fundamental truth at its root is paradoxical. This is referred to as the cosmic giggle or the Joker or the Fool. So what do I mean by this? Okay, Socrates' statement. The one thing that I know is that I don't know. This is a paradox. Okay, what do you know? And then you're like, well, I don't actually know that because I was told that. Well, I don't actually know this because this is something that came along to me as well. I guess the only thing I could say that I know is that I don't know everything. And in which case, that's a paradox. And in which case, ha, ha, ha. As the example last week, right? Stone is the hardest thing that we know of, right? But molecularly speaking, it's actually got a lot of empty space in it, which is paradoxical. How does that make sense? So it's both empty, but also dense. And this is the cosmic giggle. This is the Fool. This is the paradoxical nature of the fundamental truth of all things. That to dig down and to really dig into it metaphysically means that there's a paradox waiting for you there. And this is the Fool's journey. So in this way, the Fool is the beginning and the end, right? The end wraps itself back into the beginning. It's Ouroboros. It's the snake eating its own tail. So this is why the Fool is so important, and this is why we see the Joker in the deck, because of this tie to the esotericism. And so the Fool, if you're actually drawing that card and you're getting that card, it represents a new hope, a beginning. It also represents a childishness, a purity. I'm just going to go, it's like a child deciding to run into a field just because it feels like it. Not to know where you're going, not to know what you're in for, but just to go and to have some levity. So it's actually a very positive card. So, to the layman, right? Oh, the Fool. Oh, gosh, I don't want to be an idiot. It's quite the opposite. It's actually quite nice to get the Fool card. I enjoy that card quite a bit. Moving on, a card that is not so readily understood by the layman, the Hierophant. So without getting too much into it, if we track this word Hierophant back, in Latin we have Hierophantes, and then in Greek it's the same, Hierophantes, which means one who teaches the rites of sacrifice and worship, or literally meaning one who shows sacred things. Hieros means sacred. So in this way, it comes from the same root as enlightenment. to shine, the expounder of esoteric doctrines, one who teaches. So the Hierophant card is one of the top cards of the major arcana and is representing a type of illumination. So let's make this more digestible to everybody, right? So to give out this card or to deal this card, Hierophant, means somebody might say, oh, I'm going to get full woke and reach nirvana. No. So let me try to get this sensation. You realize that a number of things in your past are connected. They're connected and there's a lesson. It's kind of like one of those moments where like, how did I not see that before? Putting these different things together that you didn't think were connected before is enlightenment. To see that it's not just a bunch of garbage information and that there was a pattern through your life, and recognizing that pattern is illumination, is the sacred, is the esoteric, is the divine, is what the Hierophant brings. So to get that card means that you're going to realize something. You're going to realize something that was hidden from you, not maliciously, but you're now at a place to realize something that you couldn't before. So it's a good card, but you'll stand to be humbled by it. One of the highest, most, you could say, spiritual cards. Another one that isn't so accessible is the Aeon. It's spelt A-E-O-N, but it's the same as the word eon, E-O-N. And the Aeon is an indescribable amount of time. Infinite. Well, not necessarily infinite. You can't measure it. There's no way of knowing how long. That's the Aeon. But eon could be understood simply as a generation, a lifetime, a period of existence, or simply a long period of time. It's been used several different ways, but how I want to break this down in the story of tarot is in esotericism. This card Aeon is card number 20. So it's the second to last card in the story of tarot. The last card is the universe. So before the universe was created, there was the Aeon. So imagine with me for a second. Just imagine. I know this is pretty woo-woo stuff. But before the Big Bang, there was a pre-universe. And in this pre-universe, something was cooking up for a very, very long time. This period of time in the pre-universe is referred to as the Aeon. You can't measure how long this was going on because time is a matter of light. Light is time. So how can you measure something prior to the realization of light in the universe, right? How could you measure its time? So that's why it's Aeon, an indiscernible amount of time. The cooking up of the Big Bang, the cooking up of the universe itself. Again, this is the level of esotericism that we're dealing with when it comes to the real story of tarot. So that's what Aeon is in a nutshell. This next one, and the last one of the hard to understand, is the Magician. The Magician is also one of the top tier triumph trump cards. But instead of approaching this like the layman would, oh, a magician is somebody who pulls a coin from behind your ear, puts somebody in a box, chops them in half. No, nothing like that. Magic in the ancient sense is a supernatural art. It is a spiritual, divine sort of thing. The Magi were people who could predict the future. They were people who could do crazy things like levitate or put their arms through walls. You're talking about some badassery here. Magic, or Maia, as the Greeks call it, is a form of art in understanding so thoroughly how things work in the universe on a metaphysical level that you can work it like art. And it was a priestly class of people, kind of super religious, not religious in the negative sense of religiosity, but like super spiritual. So you would dedicate your whole life, or you would dedicate everything to become a magi, to become a magus. And the root of the word itself is essentially to have power. Now, to have power in the most altruistic sense, right? Because then we're starting to get into white lodge, black lodge, white magic, black magic, this whole topic. But know that the magician is the one working in the background of what is superficially available to the eyes in the universe. The magician is crafty and cunning in ways that one would never understand. They are advanced in knowledge that is not accepted or well spoken in the common grain of society. So usually getting the magician card means that something strange is afoot. Something mysterious is going to show its head. Mysterious being very much tied to the very concept of magic itself, right? And the word magic too, oh gosh, I'm not going to get into it. I could do a whole segment on magic alone, so no, there's a big treasure trail here. But for our purposes, the magician is going to bring something inexplicable to the person that's being read. Now, to move on, I want to address, to finish this whole session, the cards that people assume are negative, right? Right at the beginning, I said that certain people don't want to get their cards read because they think they'll get a bad card. So let's talk about what those bad cards actually mean. So the most quintessential bad card, in quotes, is death. And in tarot, death is not physical death. The teenager in you is no longer living. I think if you're listening to this, you're at least a young adult. You are not that teenager anymore. And in this way, that you died. And the one that was reborn was the young adult you, or the you that you are now. And in this way, we die many times in life. Many, many, many times. When you move from one place to another, you move far away. This is a death. You no longer exist in that space. You will go exist somewhere else. And to those that would believe in the transmigration of souls and reincarnation, how is this not different? This is an allegorical death. So I'm actually quite relieved when there's a death card. I like it. It's very dramatic, and it means that something is going to get shook up. There's going to be a tremendous difference. You're going to wave goodbye to the old way, and you're going to be plunged into a new way. So this could be you changing your personality. This could be a new career. This could be breaking old habits and forming new ones. This could take several different forms, but death is a transition in tarot. Things need to be destroyed in order to be recreated, or things need to be destroyed to be created. It's like the wildfires in the Pacific Northwest or in the West or in Australia or so forth. The fire clears the ground for new growth to come up. So thus, death is necessary to clear the grounds to create something new. if a garden grows way too many weeds, it might just be worth it to set fire to the whole thing at a certain point. So in which case this death is very welcomed, right? The other taboo one is the devil. The devil in tarot has well, I guess it does have something to do with the Christian devil, but it's not like the Christian devil. So the tarot devil card represents being stuck, being convinced in the material world. What do I mean by this? I mean that you are stuck in a very shallow perspective. You can't see beyond your immediate circumstances. So you think that you're trapped. You think that you feel claustrophobic. You feel misunderstood. You feel debaucherous, anxious, depressed, because you have closed yourself into a bubble, a very narrow approach to life. The devil wants to convince you that the only thing that exists is the material world. So you neglect all of the abstract world, you neglect all of the ethereal, you neglect all of the spiritual, you neglect all that is beyond your immediate bubble, and you call that immediate bubble the everything, and you think that you have it all figured out. So getting the devil too also means that you are obsessed in some sort of carnal affair. So you think of like, people who are hedonistic, or what common culture calls fuckboys, that they're obsessed with the physical body of women, or women that are obsessed with the physical bodies of other men, or people who prey upon each other. This is the devil, in the sense that it's the individuals are only convinced of the flesh. They're only convinced of, again, what is immediately presentable to their eyes, hedonism. And so it's getting the devil card means that there's something else that's happening here beyond this, but you're going to be convinced of a very small understanding of what's actually happening around you, or that you're digging up old habits from the past. So, say you had certain codependent tendencies, habits when you were younger. This old relationship style comes up again, and you have to relearn this lesson. This is the devil. It's exposing your former sins to yourself, making you reface and affirm the lessons that you've learned so that you can move on. And lastly, the bad card for the bad cards, or the most taboo card, is the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man is maybe the worst card to get, maybe, if you want to look at it like that. But what the Hanged Man means is sacrifice. And sacrifice is necessary. So in order to continue, something needs to be given up. So for instance, you want a new relationship, one with characteristics like this, but you're still in a relationship. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to break up. You need to sacrifice that relationship to get another relationship, right? So it's this age-old, you can't whatever your cake and eat it too, You have to give to get. And usually the thing that you have to sacrifice is something that you don't want to sacrifice. So the Hanged Man is you affirming what is most important. And it's not easy. Sacrifice is not welcomed. As another example, if you want to move into the career field, that means you have to move to the city or whatever, right? You have to move to a different place. This means you have to sacrifice your relationships where you've been living. You have to sacrifice the way you've been living. You have to give that up, let that die in order to get, right? And that's the idea of the Hanged Man. So nobody likes that card because it's sobering. It's transitional. It's very intense. People don't like it because, again, it's always going to be you giving up something that you don't want to give up, but you have to give it up. So, as a quick summary of all that I said, the history of taboo is, or the history of tarot is very convoluted. There is a tremendous story to the trump cards in the major arcana of tarot. The court cards, the regular card decks, are married to tarot decks. Their history is one and the same. It's no accident that magicians play with cards. Think about it. The actual act of using tarot for divination is not conjuring spirits. It is delving into your subconscious. It's only telling you things that you already know. It's just making it clear to you. So if you can imagine having a readout, you're very confused in your head. If only you could get everything in your head into a kind of diagram or into a grid so that you could see it more clearly. That is what tarot is. Yes, it does involve the esoteric if you want to get into that. Yes, you can look into it more and get into all sorts of strange spiritual topics. But at the very surface, getting a reading is a check-in with yourself. It's a way of checking in and gaining clarity and affirming your direction in life. Tarot, in its philosophy, is saying that everything is a process. One process leads to another process. And even if you reach the end, you're going right back to the beginning. And in this process of life, we always need to learn things. Even if I'm 97 years old, I still have to learn things. I'm still here to learn things. I'm still here to contribute. In tarot, it's an allegory for life itself. All the major arcana, all the minor arcana are different archetypes, are different parts of life that are always going to be there. So it's an interesting way for us to reflect and for us to assess. So at the very least, we could use the cards to understand where we're at, to better understand the universe, to better introspect, or we could use the cards to investigate occultism. Or if none of this is really for you and you're just curious about it all, then this is to say that this is not devilry, this is not idolatry, this is not even conjuring spirits. This is plainly archetypes. Archetypes. The things, the metaphysics that exist for everybody, everywhere, all the time. All right, and with that, I will close this session.